Welcome to Subjective Objectives. I'm Quinn, and that's Ryan, and we're here to talk to you guys about some economics.
Yo, Quinn, how you doing, man? How's everything been lately? Everything good with jobs and searching and everything?
Yeah, everything's going really well. Just got back from a climbing trip in Colorado. I've been looking forward to getting started on this podcast with you. I know we got a pretty exciting topic for the people today. If you want
Absolutely.
to talk about it, if you want to kind of introduce the topic a little bit, how's your knee going?
Knee's going good, man. Obviously, physical therapy, a couple days a week for a couple hours, but every day we're getting a little bit stronger. Hopefully we can make that knee and physical part go into the mental part here, and let's get some good conversation going. Speaking of that, we are today going to be talking about light vehicles, specifically used vehicles, and how the prices of them have increased greatly from what we've seen over the last couple months, over the last quarter or so. And personally, I
It's
found a lot
almost
of good
been, I feel
information
like
on
it's
all
almost
this.
been close to a year at this point now that car prices have been going up, or used car prices
Well,
specifically.
yeah, it's actually, you're probably right on that. It's probably been about a year, as Quinn just pointed out. The one thing I do want to say about that before we go into real great detail is I found that in the spring or when the most cars are actually being sold as far as new vehicles. So we're looking about at that time where they generally would have already started to increase naturally. But we are looking beyond the natural increase, beyond things like inflation. And we want to look at more of because we found that there's a great increase in the cost of used cars. I know a lot of people, a lot of different news sources have been talking about it, but we would just want to go in and really see all the repercussions of this. Where do we feel like this is coming from? Because I don't think it's just as plain sighted as people think. Some people think, oh, it's just COVID, or oh, it's just an increase in the demand. But I think it's a lot more than that. I think we're seeing repercussions from effects of recessions that we've had 20 years ago. The dot-com bust, the '08 financial crisis. I think all of these are having impacts on the current prices of used cars because people are tighter with their dollar and they're trying to spend better by their money. And this is causing us to basically buy better cars. And if you look at Toyota, who is one of the largest uh, car dealers that's not domestic here in America, they are the number one seller of international brand cars, especially here in America. And they are known for creating a higher quality car. So these cars are lasting longer, and people are willing to spend more on their used cars to keep them running instead of spending a large chunk of change or savings to go and buy a newer car, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a good
So that's what
point.
we're
I
going to be.
know, I know Lexus and Toyota were number one and two in most reliable cars of 2021. So
Um,
it's a good
but
point.
yeah, that's just a general overview. I mean, we're going to sit here and talk about some different stuff. Quinn, what did you find most interesting about some of your stuff? What did you find in your sources?
Well, I think the interesting, a super interesting aspect of this to me is that, like you said, people are getting smarter with their dollar, and they might be buying nicer cars, but right now they're still buying cars. You'd think that after the COVID pandemic, you had tens of millions unemployed due to the crisis, and car sales, regardless of price change, are still going up. I think that's one of the most surprising things to me about this used car issue. I think the inflation rate it's pretty high right now. It's 4.2% in 2021. It's been heading that way for quite a minute now, and the Fed's definitely not helping those things. But you still see, just to give you guys some baseline understanding of how much the used car price has risen, just from early 2020 to 2021. Now we've seen a 36% increase in used cars in general, especially trucks, from 2020 to 2021. So regardless of inflation rate, that is an incredible increase in price.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things that I found that goes along with inflation. I was looking at the PCE core deflator, and it shows that from February 21st till May 21st, inflation has so the PCE core deflator, for those that don't know, basically exclude necessities like food and utilities, and it shows a better rate of inflation for those things that aren't necessarily required for us to survive. So that's what the core PCE deflator does, for those that don't know. But it increased, and this one I was saying, it actually only increased about 3%. So that's actually even a little bit less than we're talking about for cars. So that really got me to think, okay, so what is causing
You're
this?
saying the general PCE only increased 3% as opposed to 4.2%.
Right.
Okay,
So
yeah. So that
that was
then
honestly
the increase would be even higher at
greater.
that rate. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was really wild to me. So actually, I started looking up demand for cars during times of recessions and times of crisis. And I found that cars are actually pretty elastic. And that basically means that as the price changes, people respond either respond more or respond less, depending on the level of intensity of the elasticity. And so cars are actually around 15. The elasticity of 15 during a time of recession is astronomical. I mean, it's kind of everything is happening almost in the opposite of how I expected it to happen. You would think, okay, so we're in times of recession, people are going to be more tight with their money. Well, it's the opposite. Demand for cars actually seems to be goes up during
Do you
these
think that
recessions.
just like on your thoughts, do you think that has to do what do you think this demand driver is? Do you think it's just people have been cooped up for so long? I mean,
So
that's gotta be part of it.
that was my original thought, was COVID is actually causing people to not want to get in mass transit. So you're having people that don't want to take mass transit
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
to basically want to try and get some kind of cheap but reliable mode of transportation. So they obviously can't buy new cars, so they're going to go out and purchase some kind of used car. Um, and this trend has actually started since 2010, since really since the '08 financial crisis, which really ended up we seeing most of the repercussions in '08, '09, eventually led to used cars being purchased at almost three times the amount of new cars. And we're talking about, again, light vehicles. So we're talking about generally like a RAV4 or like a F-150 or something like that. We're not talking about like super big trucks or electric vehicles. So those kind of we're not excluding them, but the majority of people buy light used vehicles. So I do want to mention that.
Yeah.
But really, what I think this shows is the last 10 years is people are, since the financial crisis, have become better with their money, and they're not, and since cars are lasting longer, they're not finding it necessary to buy a new car when the used cars are doing the job for them. The COVID aspect, I think, really just amplifies the necessity for having a used vehicle versus using mass transit. The people that can afford new vehicles, those people are also probably the people that are transitioning to buying more electric vehicles, taking those risks, that are buying more. They're more likely to take on the Teslas and the Tesla Model 3 or those kind of things. It was really interesting to see how since really 2000, we haven't reached
That is
18
such a cool
million.
point that it's just amplifying a trend, and then mix that with a supply shortage, and you get the prices that we're getting today. That's really cool.
Yeah, and if you really think about it, if we go back to 2000, it took 15 years from the dot-com bust to recover as far as new car sales in America. We hit it was almost 18 million in 2000. And then obviously 1999, 2000, the dot-com bust happened. It took us 15 years. It took us till 2015 to get to 17.4 million cars sold. That's a long time. Since 2010, though, used vehicles were at like 34.6 million, 37.5 million, and then they were down to like 36 point like 5 million again in 2020. But our new vehicles are only sold at 14, 17, 15. So they're not quite 3 to 1, but it's just about that odd where it's like 2.5 to 1 that used cars are being bought to new cars. And it's because people, I think, are being smarter with their money, but they're also cars are being made with higher quality. I think there was a point where people realized that the quality of cars matter. And I think honestly, Toyota was the first one to recognize that, and that's why they're the number one seller in America now, because people in America care about the quality of the materials or whatever they're buying, and Toyota has proven themselves over and over again. So it's leading us to not need to buy new cars as often. And then why would you buy a new car when you know a Toyota can provide a high quality car that's only a couple years old? I
And
mean,
what's
their
the famous
resale value
quote
is,
that it's like $5,000 right when you take it off the lot in value?
oh, dude, it's probably more than that sometimes. And when you really
Yeah.
start to think about it, that's a frustrating thing. Is like, when people are trying to be tight with their money and try to save money, how can you justify, oh, I take this car off the lot and I lose $5,000 when I can buy this car that, yeah, it's not worth nearly as much, but I'm not spending, I don't have monthly payments. I can pay it off right away, possibly. Especially if we think about all the stimulus checks and things that people got, where yes, some people had to use them for necessities, but some people were able to actually use that to buy. You'll find people bought a lot of durable goods. They bought refrigerators, they bought used cars, they bought a lot of materials that would cost a little bit more, but they're still able to purchase them because they were given money. Now, I'm not here to talk about how people should spend their money, but one thing is to notice is that if they're able to buy these durable goods, those are purchases that we make every so often. It's not like you go and buy groceries every other week or every week. You have to buy a durable good. You buy it so it lasts. You buy a refrigerator so it lasts 10 to 15 years. You don't buy it so it lasts 3 to 4 or 2 to 3. That would be silly. So I think it's just all what it comes down to, I really think, is how these recessions, how we respond to all of these recessions, really is causing people to be smarter. But it's not something that we should want to have to have. We should want them to be smarter, but not because of the situation that's happening.
Yeah,
Um,
I like how you're really coming into it from the consumer perspective and giving us kind of that behavioral economic explanation for why consumers are making the decisions they do. I think that's a really good point. That it has a lot to do with consumer behavior and not only to do with some of these supply issues that we kind of discussed before this podcast. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, when we originally started doing this, I got the idea because my dad hauls cars, and we were just talking one day, and he was just said, "Man, I don't haul any new cars anymore," and it really just got me thinking, like, why is that? Because when my dad worked for himself back in the 80s and 90s, he was hauling new cars left and right all the time. He didn't haul new cars from Indiana to Ohio. Now he said in the last 2 years, I think he's maybe hauled 50 new cars, and they're always Subarus, he said. Now, that just could be his
Those are
route
great
and with
cars.
his company, but why just Subarus? Now, I know as a consumer, Subaru is a reliable brand, kind of like Toyota.
Yeah.
They are very
Is he
good
driving them
rated.
out west or out east? Do you know?
So he actually goes from anywhere from Baltimore, the port of Baltimore,
Huh.
to Ephrata, Pennsylvania, to Canton, Ohio, to Indiana, to Detroit, Michigan,
Is
and
Subaru not
a lot of
domestic?
places in between.
Is it
Say that
domestic?
again.
Is Subaru domestic? Is it a domestic brand? Do you know?
Mm, I don't think so.
Okay, interesting.
But they are made, but they do have stuff made here, but I don't think they were originally domestic. But they do have a couple plants here. But a lot of companies have um, plants in here in America just to honestly to cut down on price and supply and stuff like that. But I
Oh
was
wow,
reading.
it's Japanese.
Is it okay?
That's incredible.
Yep. Well, again, Toyota's also they were Japanese originally too, dude. They
Japanese
just
car
got a lock.
manufacturers.
Dude, they just got a lock on
So
how to
reliable.
be good manufacturers, like you just said. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like they have it on lock and they're good at it. It's if you look at scales of economy, Japan has really taken over manufacturing from America. It started off with steel, and it really has just continued to evolve from steel and honestly more into the auto manufacturing business. I mean, that little, I shouldn't say little island, but they are very good at what they do. So it shows, honestly. Y-
One interesting thing about where we were at the beginning of 2022 is I don't know how many of you all watch TV and see ads for cars, but I think almost on every vehicle ad last year, and if now that you think about it, you'll probably notice how much it slowed down. But every vehicle ad had these crazy incentives to come buy these cars. A lot of people were talking about, there might be a car bubble because people were getting so much financial aid when they went to buy a car. And one of the biggest kind of incentives was these car dealerships would say, 84 months for zero down, like, zero down and zero interest. You know what I mean? And that, especially in trucks, that drove an insane demand for trucks, and almost the entire truck fleet last year was depleted at the very beginning of 2020 because of all these crazy incentives to go buy these cars, and people took advantage of those incentives. I think the marketing worked, and they realized, hey, I'm never going to get an opportunity like this where it's 0% APR to go in and buy a car. And I think that's all that would probably also contributed to that trend. Like, hey, if I'm going to spend my money on a durable good, I might as well do it when I have 0% APR.
Dude, I'm glad you brought that up because I'm a huge person about, like, when it comes to finance, I'm a huge person that you need to uh everyone nowadays wants to take out more than it can afford for a big house or something like that. Like, oh, I have credit, I can use it. Well, I'm not necessarily disagreeing or agreeing with how you do it, but the one thing that you said is the zero APR, which, if annual percentage rate, is just how much you're going to pay on your interest. For those that don't know, um, it it really saves you a lot of money if you can pay it off in that 84 months. But what I would have been interested to see, or the small print or fine print of what it said, is how much was that percentage after those 84, or that time period, whatever, however long it was. I guarantee you would have seen a huge increase in the rate. So the incentive for people would then be to pay it off as fast as possible, hoping that people would, do that. Problem with that is it doesn't always happen that way. And but with the one point that you made was interesting, is how everyone was going out and buying new cars. Well, what that did is it created a shortage, right? So if you have a
Not
shortage,
just that; those also applied to used cars too. The
okay,
those deals, those
okay,
incentives.
fair enough, right? I misunderstood you there then. But what that does is, it still, if it creates a shortage, then what's that do for anyone that has a shortage? You get to increase prices, right?
Right.
Well, if you're increasing prices of used cars, then can't you get more for your money when you trade it in on a new car? So, like, why wouldn't you be incentivized to try and do that, if all of a sudden your car was originally worth $2,000, and now, because there's a shortage for it and people need these cars, now it's worth 3,000.
Well, I think back in 2020, the used car, like the very beginning of 2020, prices were just starting to rise because of that, because of the phenomenon you're exactly talking about, right? Like, people are like, hey, my used car is more valuable. You guys don't have as much of a supply, but it was just starting back then. So I don't think they knew it right at the beginning. Like, they're starting to sell their used cars back in the last 4 to 6 months. That's when these prices have really kind of leveled out at such a high increase.
So, do you think it's fair to say that, again, COVID has just amplified effects of the shortage? Because if
Maybe I think it's definitely amplified what you were talking about, which is consumer behavior. I think it's 100% amplified that effect. But there have been some traditional supply effects that have contributed to this, and one of those was the incentives I'm talking about. Um, some other things are, obviously when COVID first hit, we had a bunch of global trade issues where countries stopped trading with each other, especially some Asian manufacturing countries. They stopped shipping and exporting their goods because everybody was worried about COVID and what to do, and there was a supply situation. Everybody paused their operations, and this is literally in almost every industry in the world. So of course that's going to create a supply chain problem, and it definitely, cars was one of the things to get hit. And so it wasn't just consumer behavior. We do have to go into some of these fundamental reasons why COVID um, did affect used car prices. And I think a lot of people are talking about one of the largest reasons that most news articles you'll see talking about is the microchip shortage, right? Um,
That's the first thing that always seems to come to mind. Is always the microchip shortage led to, and
right.
I hate
And
to interrupt you.
I don't think it's the primary. I think kind of you hit the nail on the head. Like it definitely there was some amplification of previous consumer behavior that that COVID just kind of made worse. So let's talk about chips for a little bit.
Before we get into chips, I do want to say one more thing, just a little bit off the track of that, but it's the same idea. So in our GDP, the auto transport and vehicle industry was about 3% of our GDP before this pandemic. It increased 3.2%. Wait, let me hear. I have my 3.1%. It changed. So it increased, it almost doubled its percentage of our GDP over the last year since all of this has happened.
This was
That
used
was
cars.
from this is the auto vehicle. This is the vehicle industry in general. This isn't
Vehicles
just
in it.
used
Okay.
cars, but think about the effect that that's having if used cars are almost 3 to 1 compared to new vehicles. Now we still need to consider part manufacturers and things like that are also part of that, so that's something to consider. But that's still a problem too because we have a shortage. If
Yeah.
we have a shortage for all these parts, we've just said how we have a shortage for all materials. We had trading problems with foreign countries over in Asia, and not just Asia. We had trading problems with a lot of different people because people were scared that COVID was gonna get to us or get to them, and everyone had the same worry. And it's not. I'm not trying to not validate it because it's definitely validated, but it just shows how like globalization in America and every manufacturing and business is becoming more and more integrated. And when there's one problem in one part of an industry, it has ample effects that go beyond just its own industry. And it happens a lot faster than people realize.
Yeah.
We're talking about the auto industry and used cars, but think about what that has on, all of these other kind of industries like sales and on marketing data and all this kind of stuff and how it changes the importance of where you draw your data from whenever it comes to anything. And if we're talking about an industry that doubled its percentage of our GDP, that's a huge deal
And
when
just
we're
to clarify
talking.
the time frame on this is 2020 to 2021, or what over what period is this?
This was the last, I think, 3 years. It
Okay.
said it
Yeah.
started to increase it. So it was since
That's interesting.
2018, I think, is when I remember the date started. So this goes back, I think, far. Like I said, this goes back farther than just COVID. We need to look. We have to look at the financial crisis and the effect that that had on people, and you have to look at the .com because have we really ever recovered completely from both of those recessions? My opinion is we were very close, but I don't think we ever actually completely recovered as an economy. It seemed like as soon as we were getting back to that point, something else happened.
Yeah.
And that happened twice now. '08, and then obviously we had COVID. Um, it's just crazy how we continue to believe and we have expectations about how the economy is gonna work, but we continually are fooled or something continuously happens to prove us wrong and change how we have to look at the economies. And this is just another example how COVID has really changed how we need to look at the markets, how we need to look at how we need to govern markets. We could go in a whole bunch of different industries and talk about how many different things, but regardless, we're going to see the same effects. We need to make sure that we are correctly regulating, but also allowing the consumer to, in America, we need to make sure the consumer is able to do what they need to do because they are 70%. Our consumption is 70% of the GDP.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
15% investing, government transfers and expenditures are another percentage. And you have a couple other small things, but consumption is over 70% of our GDP, which I'm not saying is a good thing because really, I personally believe we should save more, which is going to have a negative effect. I know people are like, that's not going to be a good thing if we start saving more, but it's kind of a long-term plan versus a short-term plan.
Yeah.
Um,
And to kind of come full circle on your consumer behavior point is only in 2015. It really wasn't even that long ago when, or might have been a little bit later, but Robert Thaler, the behavioral economist who won the Nobel Prize for economics, was the first person to kind of prove, because in all of our GDP models and all of our economic models in general up to this point, one of the assumptions that we make is that consumers are rational. That's one of the assumptions that is made by every economic model that you see today, and they account that in modeling all of our economic growth and any measure of economic um, market occurrences. And so Robert Thaler was like, hey, there's no way that's right. And I think, like, common sense wise, all of us are like, yeah, there's no way consumer people are rational, because that just can't be right. But Robert Thaler was the first one to prove it in a paper, enough to a point where they gave him the Nobel Prize in economics for it. And so that's kind of what's happening here too. Like, why are people buying cars when the prices are going up? Like, consumers are not rational. That's ultimately ultimately a truth.
You know, I just smile and laugh at that statement because, in economics 101, we're constantly taught how we can hold certain measures constant, and we're able to get a good explanation of why certain things happen. But
Right.
as you go through more advanced theories and you start to obtain more knowledge about economics, you realize this really isn't the case. But we're never, as an undergrad, you're never really completely taught the true advanced theories. Now, I have gone out and searched for them and looked for them, and I find them very interesting. And that's something that I love to do. I think that people are not obviously rational behaviors. And it's honestly what drives me to love economics so much, because we have these models that generally predict how people do, and it's pretty good, but it's not exact. And I think there are a way to do that. It's just coming up with the models and the equations to be able to do that. And that sounds easy, but it's not. I mean, it's very difficult to try and come up with the equation to figure out how people are going to act and react. But there is a study out there that was done on, it's called the endowment effect, if I remember correctly. And it talks about how people actually react different and respond different according to if they're adding to their endowment or their own self-worth. So for example, if you buy a house, you're going to actually make decisions differently on how, when you buy a house versus if you're going to go out and buy something that's not going to really add any value. So like, food, yes, you need it, but it's not adding value. So you actually respond to it differently than if you were to have to spend it on something differently. Like, so you're actually more likely and more inclined to say, hey, this is going to increase my self-worth by $300,000 over the next 30 years because I'm going to eventually own this house and I'm going to have it paid off, and then it's going to be worth that much to me. Well, you might, versus $300,000 you would spend, on all these other little goods, you would be less likely to make those decisions because you're not increasing your own worth. And that's completely rational in my head, but it's not actually rational in an economic model, because that's not how we have things set up. What that ends up leading to, if you think about all of this, think about the value of used cars right now. If everything is going up, not only do you have matters where people are scared of getting the virus, but in these massive cities, if you might be willing to take that risk all of a sudden because, like, hey, right now I might buy this car, and if in 2 months, I can sell it for even more, you can actually make more money. That's a simple, as an investor, that's a kind of a simple thing. But as a consumer, that's a totally different mindset and how to go in to react to a pandemic. And so people over the last 10 years have possibly realized that it's better to buy the car and take what you need to do and then move forward versus continue to suffer and make the decisions that are going to continue to hurt you. And people are going to want to work, or that's what we hope, or people are going to continue to try and work. And so that's why they're going to buy the car, so they can still get to work, not worry about catching COVID on a mass transit system or in an Uber Lyft or something like that. So this idea expands on this used car thing. If we think about it from the perspective of, even though cars aren't necessarily worth their dollar value, especially if we think of new cars, but if
Sure.
we think of used cars, do we think about them differently? Because a lot of their subtraction has already happened. As a used car, we didn't take it off the lot, so we didn't lose that $5,000, but we still have that car that's worth so much. If we extend that thought beyond it, it makes sense that people are going to be willing to buy a used car. And as the prices of them go up, they're going to see even more value in them because there's going to be a trade later down the road. The
Maybe,
problem
but
is
there's a limit to that. People will
exactly.
definitely identify, hey, I can just be patient. Like I know the price, the cause of prices here is primarily the supply. So if the supply will go up eventually, I just need to be patient. I mean, we have not seen it for sure. There definitely has been an uptick of sales rather than a decrease, which is, you know, contrary to what we would think. But consumers will be patient. They will stop buying extremely expensive cars. They will be a little bit more patient. And if they're patient, they're going to be smarter with their money. Prices will go down. If it goes down 20%, there's a real possibility of of a decrease that much in the next year. So consumers definitely need to be patient. Now,
I
I do want to go into to talk about these chips because it is a primary part of this discussion. So why? I mean, I know that my car has a chip lamp. I don't know if your car clearly has a chip that controls a good portion of your vehicle, but I'd say, I don't know the exact percentage, but a large percentage of consumers, I'm sure most of the people watching this today, they probably have chips in their car. And so it's a key part of manufacturing. Chips not only control your music and everything else, but it also controls your car now. It controls the ignition. It controls how much oil interacts with the vehicle. It controls so much of the vehicle now that it's a key part of operations. And before, going into the direct effects of the chip, I think it's good to know that when COVID started, the manufacturers were the first people to identify, hey, you know, people might not be buying as much. They tried to identify a trend that ended up not coming to fruition for them because they did not see, the manufacturers and the dealers did not see, hey, there's a pandemic, people are going to be buying more cars. They saw, hey, there's a pandemic, people are not going to be buying our vehicles as much. So what did those manufacturers decide to do? Well, they decided to put a lot of stop orders on the number of imports and supply imports that they were getting from other countries. And so that was what really started the first slowdown of this chip shortage, of part shortages, of the supply shortages, was the manufacturer's decision to not take into account, hey, consumers want to buy more cars, and they thought there was going to be an extreme drop off in the amount of purchased vehicles. And so they put in less orders from overseas, and that's what started the delay. Because once you stop those orders, starting that, like you said, globalization is in fact real. Everything is interconnected. So once you stop that and then restart that system again, where you're like, okay, now we need to order more supply, then that's gonna set your project back like 4 months already, just because of um, the significant time it takes for goods to get across countries. And I mean, there's a blockade right now of freighters. Freighters are just, having a traffic jam in the middle of the Panama Canal and other kind of global areas where freighters pass. They're encountering traffic jams, and like that's an unforeseen problem that can slow down this production process as well. And so that's what originally started this chip shortage. So now, okay, we don't have as many orders, but now we're going to rise the orders again. And now we have to like almost double the orders because there's so much demand for vehicles right now in America. And so what's happening to that chip production? Well, in 1990, the US accounted for 37% of semiconductor production in the world. And that's pretty freaking huge. What is it today? Well, it's 12%. So, you can kind of understand how those numbers add up, and and why it makes a difference, and why the chip shortage started to be created. That's a large percentage of our semiconductors coming from overseas.
Yeah, so since we are now that we are talking about chips, let's talk about what it goes to these cars finally get to the lot. What is the actual number that we're seeing in difference of cars? So there's a couple of sources that I found. It was saying that car lots were having, now it depends on the size of the lot, obviously, but if you had 100 to 110 cars that you could fit in your lot, that's down to about 80 cars now, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but that's what, almost 20%. If you're having 100 cars, now you're down to 80. That's 20% less inventory that you have to be able to work with. So you have less on the lot. So you're constantly, and what that does, I mean, it creates a ripple effect that we can see go down the road. And as people need to buy a car, if they can't get the new car that they need, they're going to go buy a decent used car, and that's going to drive the demand up. And then we see this rippling effect that ends up causing used cars to go up. So yeah, a used car might not need a chip, but the effects that the chips are having on the news car is raising the demand for the used cars. And that's why we are seeing this huge spike in used cars, because people are willing to purchase the car because they were giving these stimulus check, which were government policy. I'm not going to talk about that, but it does show that the effects on government policy, how we respond and how we would rationally respond or not rationally respond, is different from one policy to the next policy, depending on who is in office. And I don't know who, it's hard to say from this aspect in this time, really what policy would have been better. But we can say that the causing of the chips shortage leads us to an increased price in used cars through the process of shortage of new cars. Those shortage of new cars then lead people to want to buy a decent used cars. Those decent used cars then are having a shortage of supply because everyone's buying them up, and all of a sudden they jack those prices up. Jacking those prices up then creates a better trading value for new cars, and all of a sudden you have this flow of transfers that is continuously happening. But ultimately, because we're also in a pandemic, people are being smarter with their money. They're not willing necessarily to take that big risk on a new car, but they are willing to take the risk on something that they can pay off now because they have some extra money with the stimulus. It's a vicious cycle that we see going on that really started with our expectations. And it's always, kind of, where do we expect things to go? If you ever talk about anything in the finance, it's always about, where do we expect the market to go? Or how do we feel about this? Like, where do we think this is going to go in the future? It's never any concrete thing, but it's always about how we feel. And that's kind of crazy to think about, that's really what ends up determining how we react and how things happen in the world as far as the economy goes and how markets go. And it takes something as simple as the automobile industry to say, hey, we're going to have a problem here. We need to cut back on orders. They responded incorrectly. And we're seeing a huge
Yeah,
problem now with the
yeah.
price of new cars. I mean,
And
it's
we're
not
we're
always.
also seeing a similar problem with, you know where our supply is manufactured, and that's been something that we've had issues with, for a while now in a bunch of different industries. But it's like the U.S. does need to have a little bit more production capacity within its borders, it seems, because it wouldn't react as harshly, to these kind of global shutdowns, if you will.
I couldn't agree with you more. The problem with it is that people here, we're now constantly focusing on education. We're constantly focusing on better, which I'm 100% for. But it also leads some people to believe that we don't have to work for what we have. And in that example, there are certain things that we are just going to have to learn, that we are going to have to start manufacturing. Yes, we need to come up with ways to pay people the proper wages, and people need to be able to live on these wages and things like that. But what we need to realize is that we do need, it's the same thing as trades. If you're talking about a plumber or something like that, we are always going to need those things. If we had no plumbers and every plumber was international, how much would it cost you to get your plumbing done then? Yes, it's a little more extreme, but the concept is still the same. We need to keep some of our production domestic, and I think America continuously pushes it away, and we see repercussions constantly whenever we have recessions. Everything is great when we have everything running smoothly and the economy's growing and GDP's like growing at as economists like to say, as a healthy normal rate of growth. It's all good. But as soon as we have a problem and it's one little problem and it causes a kink, we see ripple effects that are so large down the road. And we are one of the last people to receive it because we are the consuming end. The consumer is the last people to touch the product. You could say, yes, you can resell the product, but that's a different market technically after the original production and selling of the good, whether it's durable or non-durable. So to
Yeah,
your point,
we're restarting new ways, and Congress passed a bill, the United States Innovation and Competition Act of 2021, to incentivize some of those domestic production activities. Specifically for this one, it's actually very heavily incentivizes chip production and semiconductor production, because we realize that that's a pretty strategic production percentage that we're missing out on in the world. I mean, that's the chips are not just going to be useful for used cars. Actually, the reason the shortage exists in the first place is because there was so much. People were working from home, so they were buying more laptops, they were buying more cell phones, they were buying more smart TVs, they were buying items that needed chips, and that's what the cars did. That's what the car manufacturers did not anticipate. It was other consumer behavior, not that they just never expected the shortage for car chips because they didn't expect it to relate to other industries quite as much.
Yeah, that you pretty much hit it right on the head. Dude, that was money how you just said that. It's crazy, but unfortunately, we are such an interconnected world. We are so integrated that every little effect.
Unfortunately, it's pretty fortunate. Pretty fortunate.
Okay, yes. I don't mean unfortunately. I mean, it's unfortunate how it's causing these bad ripple effects. In this sense, it's negative. It can be very positive too. I didn't mean to say it like that. But unfortunately, when we are in this situation, it becomes a very negative thing to most people. There are some people that are absolutely benefiting from this. If you're a used car salesman, you will probably selling your cars for more than you ever have.
I don't know though, because don't you have to buy those used cars for more? So I feel like you're probably not making as much. I mean, you're simply, if you're used cars, dealership right now, you're probably you're probably struggling quite a bit because your inventory is so low. Because it's hard to, like that. That's the problem right now, right? With used cars, is that there's just like almost no used cars on the lot. Like people are just trying to get them.
Well, that's actually a good point. So you're right. Costs do go up, so you don't necessarily make more, but at the same time, they are increasing their cash flows, which from a bank's perspective, gives them the ability to grow. That's kind of just all I was getting at there. But it's just so, and I want to go back to something I was talking about before. So I've said before how we were talking about the auto industry since 2000 has really not been as strong, even though it's grown in our percent GDP in the last couple of years. Since 2000 to 2015, new vehicles have really struggled. Well, the one thing I want to say about that is how that is going forward, how it what was I just going to say? I just completely lost my train of thought.
That's the show. We're just gonna completely lose our train of thoughts often. That happens.
But it's just been because I was looking at Mark Lines here again, and it was talking about how the auto industry. I know what it was. The auto industry in 2000 and in 2001, it hit like a negative growth percentage. So it actually shrank a little bit, and then from in 0809, it was as low as negative 23%, which means it decreased 23% from the year before. Since then, it has not hit double digits in growth.
I'm sorry, can you remind me on what the number is that's decreasing?
It was down. It was negative 23%.
No. What is the topic that's decreasing?
Oh, it was auto industry. So it was just like auto industry,
just in general, the whole industry,
light vehicles, manufactured parts and things like that. So the dot-com bust basically really hurt it, and we never fully recovered because it hit like negative 17%, then it was negative 23%, and then it was like plus 2%, plus 1%, minus 5%, plus 1%, minus like another 8%. And then the '08 financial crisis hit. So if you like keep going back, we need to realize that some industries, although yes, we started to recover as Americans and as a general economy, certain industries never truly recovered, and this might be another
No,
impact.
this will be. I think one of the things that people have to realize about the car industry, like you said, I think that this changes the outlook for the automotive industry for a significant period of time. I think that you're going to see manufacturers and dealers in general. I think they're going to try to learn how to work with a lower amount of produced cars in their inventories. I think they're not going to mind the rise in prices because they're like, hey, we just found a way that we can keep prices a little bit higher as long as they can manage inventory. So if they are a little bit better at producing some vehicles, but still don't produce enough vehicles to keep the car prices low, then they might actually, be coming out on top of this. So yeah, I mean, we might see an inventory recovery. We're definitely not going to see it today. We're definitely not going to see it 2 months from now. I would say late Q4 of 2021, but most likely, I bet we don't see a normal inventory return until mid 2022.
I
I mean,
was
this is
actually going to say December is historically the worst month, which is surprising to me because of Christmas, because everyone's spending extra money on Christmas. But it's actually one of the historically worst months to buy cars. Like I said at the beginning of our episode, we generally see the highest spike in bought cars in the spring. So it's like between quarter 1 and the start of quarter 2, like February, March, April, May, um, that time frame. So it's probably going to be the better part of a year until we actually start to see that flip. At least efficiently see the less cars in the lot, but still see the efficiency of movement of cars. Um, when we talk about business logistics and things like that, ultimately a high inventory isn't always a good thing. And maybe that's something that these car dealerships, as you just said, are working with now, is finding their actual a
how
good
how
rate.
how can we make this situation into a positive for us? That's probably what they're going through right now. I mean, if you look at businesses in general, right? When recessions happen, people are like, oh, when the recession's over, they're going to be hiring more and the company's going to be back and moving just like normal, just like the old days. Well, what actually happens is a lot of these companies, they focus on process. So the second that they have to fire, they have to let go of a certain percentage of their workforce. They then learn how to work with that workforce more efficiently. So they'll whether it's hire outside consultants or have internal processes that develop new processes for their own company. They learn how to do the same amount of work with less employees. So therefore, when the recession does get lifted, they don't necessarily hire back those same roles that they let go because they learned how to work without them.
So let me ask you this then. How do you think the labor force has responded in the auto industry? Do we think that the decrease so if we go back to chips, do we think the decrease in the amount of chips that their decrease in the amount of cars manufacturers, the amount of chips they needed, do you think that ended up causing a decrease in their employment force, which then ended up causing even more problems because they realized there wasn't actually a shortage in consumption of automobiles? Do we think
Yeah,
that
that's a
actually
good
leads?
question. Do you think they let people go thinking that there would be this, like, especially these dealerships? Now, from what I've noticed, I don't know the exact number, so I cannot say for sure. But when I go to my dealership, it does not look like they have let go of a significant number of workers. But that would be an interesting fact to receive. Maybe it's something we can try to get the viewers before the next episode. Is how is this affecting employment in the automotive industry? Is it remaining the same? Is it not? I think that would be kind of um, an interesting tidbit of information to kind of lead off the next episode with. So one thing, guys, we're gonna stick with this kind of COVID economics theme for our first couple episodes. I think it's pretty relevant. It's something that we're fairly interested in. It's an easy way for us to talk to you guys about something that is relevant to all of us, and how COVID, if and how COVID is affecting this. But I think one of the best points that Ryan brought up today is that you know economics is not just a one it's not just a single faceted issue. It's coming from many different perspectives. And in fact, COVID may not even, this may not even be a COVID used car crisis. This simply could just be an amplification of past consumer behavior, and bad decisions by car manufacturers at bad times. And then, just a couple bad decisions that's going to set you back a lot of months in production. So it's interesting.
Yeah, actually, I really enjoyed the episode we've had so far, Quinn. I think it's a good way for us to get how we are as people onto the ideas that we believe. I think we did a good job today talking about like getting the viewers to see how we are going to go about through a lot of our discussions. We are not here to do anything more than just lay out our research and have a good topic and see where we
Yeah.
can go with it. We're not saying that everything that we're doing is the right way. We're not saying that we are the best at anything, but we are saying that we've had practice
We're interested.
finding
We want to learn. We're here to talk about it, and
exactly. Yep, and we're
we
here
want you guys
to
to come listen.
learn with you guys.
Yeah. If you guys have any suggestions, we'll leave an email in the description, so that you guys can email us with any suggested topics, any questions you guys have on this topic. If you want a specific source on this issue, what kind of some references that we use, feel free to reach out and email us on the specifically. We'll be releasing this as a podcast version, but you can also check us out on YouTube. So if you check us out on YouTube, just make sure that you guys drop a comment for any question that you might have, any interactive conversation that you might have. We're here, and we'll be on socials. We'll have those below as well. I think it's actually on the episode itself. Like while you're watching this on YouTube, you should see our socials at the bottom here below. Yeah, no, I'm psyched. We got to talk to you guys about used cars. I think it's interesting. This is the first time used car prices have been 36% increase. That's freaking huge, man. So it's cool that we get to talk about this.
Yeah. One last note. I kind of said something about elasticity, and that's how the consumer responds to a price change. And this is something to think about. The higher the elasticity that something is, it will ultimately depend on whether the producer pays the cost of the price change or the consumer pays the cost of the price change. And in automobiles, I honestly thought it would have been a producer focused change in who pays the cost. But this goes to show that automobiles don't necessarily follow that general rule, because a high elasticity, you would think, like I said, but it ends up that it's not necessarily that clear of a situation when it comes to automobiles. And it kind of just goes to show that, as rational actors versus irrational actors, that in and of itself creates huge amplifications and contradictions to what we would normally see or expect in all the models that we run. And that's what makes this topic, I think, so interesting for me, is what I expected responses to be were not necessarily how they came out to be. And Quinn, you showed that in a whole bunch of different examples. And I touched on a couple of different points, but it was just very fascinating to see how the response of consumers is not how I, as an economist or future economist, would expect them to be.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. Yeah, dude. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for talking about this. Thank you to all you millions of people watching this today. We appreciate you. This is Subjective Objectives, and we will be back for our next episode. Ryan, I think we're gonna do this on raw materials, right? This next episode.
Yep, raw materials is the next one. I think that's going to be another good one for us.
It's going to stay COVID related, and then we'll switch it up. You guys have a great day. Thanks for tuning in. And this is Subjective Objectives. Have a good one.